Welcome to Tea Book Club, a discussion on Paula Fox's desperate characters. This event is presented by the House of Chanel.
Hello, I'm Hanya Yanagihara, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Tea Magazine. Thank you so much for joining us for the latest installation of Tea Book Club. For this round of the series, we're reading New York City novels, books that take place, at least in part, in the city, but in which it serves as more than mere setting. Tonight, we'll explore Paula Fox's 1970 novel, Desperate Characters. In it, a woman living in a gentrifying part of Brooklyn finds herself grappling with her sense of self, her marriage, and the frayed quality of late 1960s American society, all precipitated by a bite from a perhaps rabid cat. Leading our discussion is the novelist Sigrid Nunez. I hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation, and please visit tmagazine.com for more information about Fox and to sign up for future sessions of the Tea Book Club.
Good evening and welcome back for our second season of Tea Book Club. I'm Kate Guadagnino, Tea's Deputy Digital Editor, and I'm so pleased to be here for the first episode in this round of events, for which we're focusing on New York City novels. Tonight we'll be exploring Paula Fox's 1970 novel, Desperate Characters, which is set in Brooklyn, with the award-winning novelist Sigrid Nunez. She is the author of 9 books, including The Friend, the winner of the 2018 National Book Award for Fiction, and most recently, What Are You Going Through? After Sigrid's talk, I'll join her for a chat and ask questions submitted by readers. If you have any additional questions or comments, we encourage you to share them in the chat. And now, I'm honored to introduce Sigrid Nunez.
Paula Fox took the title for Desperate Characters, her second novel for adults, first published in 1970, from Henry David Thoreau's book Walden. The massive men he wrote lead lives of quiet desperation. And we hear the desperation of the characters in Fox's novel go over the course of one long weekend, from quiet to not so quiet to deafening. The time is the late 1960s. The main character is Sophie Bentwood, a literary translator, but one who isn't working much these days or doing much of anything. And that idleness is making her bored, anxious, and depressed. She's been married for 15 years to a lawyer named Otto. They have tried, but been unable to have a child. We're told they have a high income. They live in a very nice townhouse in Brooklyn, in a gentrifying neighborhood marred, in their view, by the parts that are still occupied by what they call slum people. And they respond to the way these other soon-to-be displaced neighbors live and behave with disgust and fear, and also a kind of helpless guilt. The Bentwoods' marriage, while not entirely unsatisfactory, appears strained. But what exactly is wrong and why, and how it should be dealt with, is one of the novel's bedeviling and unresolved questions. Throughout the book, they fight. They keep sniping at each other. They are obviously one of each other's biggest sources of frustration, but they always manage to make up and carry on. Right at the beginning of the book, Sophie is bitten by a feral cat she's been feeding. And though she's afraid the cat might be rabid, she refuses at first to get medical attention, even as the bite becomes infected and painful. As we read on, we're kept in suspense about this. Will she get sick? Will she perhaps even die? The incident becomes a transformative moment for Sophie, forcing her to think about her mortality. This undignified confrontation with mortality, in her words. It prompts her to reflect on her life, including about an affair that she had several years earlier with a man named Francis, an affair Otto knows nothing about. And here I want to read a telling passage from the novel's 6th chapter. That they should be sitting across from each other in the same way they had sat for so many years, and that the habitual intimacy between them could have suffered so wrenching a violation without there being evidence of it, was harrowing to Sophie. If all these months she had so ardently lived a life apart from Otto without his sensing something, it meant that their marriage had run down long before she had met Francis. Either that or worse. Once she had stepped outside rules, definitions, there were none. Ticking away inside the carapace of ordinary life and its sketchy agreements was anarchy. She knew where she had been, she thought. Where had Otto been? What had he been thinking? Didn't he know anything? She looked at him a long time across the table. He did not seem aware of her observation. About Sophie's refusal to attend immediately to the cat bite, there is something inexplicably perverse. Late in the book, Otto practically accuses her of wanting the cat to turn out to be rabid, and when they finally follow medical advice and trap the cat and take it to the ASPCA to be tested, and before she knows the result, we find her making up her mind. If it turns out she has been infected with rabies, she will refuse the inoculations. Meanwhile, Otto is preoccupied, obsessed in fact, with the breakup of his longtime friendship and law partnership with a man named Charlie Russell. Unlike the Bentwoods and their other middle-class friends, Charlie has been caught up in the political fervor of the 60s. He wants to serve a different kind of client, not the privileged clients he and Otto have been dealing with, but the marginalized. In Otto's words, the unlovely and unloved. But Otto is furious. He accuses Charlie of using those people and their causes. He just doesn't want to be left out, he says. And though Fox doesn't take sides, she clearly doesn't mean for the reader to respect Charlie or to take him seriously. When, during a conversation with Charlie, Otto happens to bring up the Walden quote about people leading lives of quiet desperation, Charlie looks at him with murderous hatred and calls it a prime example of middle-class self-love. And much earlier in the book, alone with Sophie, Charlie tells her accusingly, "You don't know what's going on. You are out of the world, tangled in personal life. You won't survive this, what's happening now. People like you, stubborn and stupid, and drearily enslaved by introspection while the foundation of their privilege is being blasted out from under them." Wrong, of course. Between the 60s and today, I don't see that the foundation of the privileged has been blasted out from under them at all. After they've taken the cat to the ASPCA, Sophie and Otto drive to their country house on Long Island. They'd been hoping to relax, but they find the house broken into and brutally vandalized. This, of course, further unsettles them and reinforces the idea they share of everything going to hell. The book is peppered with statements like this. What's going to happen? Everything is going to hell. Don't you know this country is falling apart? Also, various references to wild youths on the subway and hippies and drug takers, all these threats to the social order. This is something that makes the book feel contemporary to me, how it reflects our same big fears, threats of infection, of violence and chaos, anarchy ticking beneath the surface, the fear of some impending explosion, but also feelings of loneliness and estrangement. It seems everything Sophie does, ordinary things like going to a party, visiting a friend, and doing a little shopping, end with her feeling filled with sadness and foreboding. These days, I know many people who are afflicted in this same way. Back home in Brooklyn, still waiting to hear from the ASPCA, Sophie has a strange epiphany. God, if I am rabbit, I am equal to what is outside, she said out loud, and felt an extraordinary relief as though at last she discovered what it was that could create a balance between the quiet, rather vacant progression of the days she spent in this house and those portents that lit up the dark at the edge of her own existence. Shortly after this, the phone rings. It's an old friend of hers calling, and while this woman is rattling on, Sophie angrily cuts her off and attacks her in the most gratuitous and vulgar way. It's as if she's become a feral cat herself, and she never expresses regret for what she's done, any more than the cat would have. And the reader feels a shift here. Up till now, Sophie has been a flawed but largely sympathetic character. Now, close to the book's end, in what is almost our last image of her, She seems despicable. She is in her bedroom about to write a letter to her mother about the incident with the cat when Otto walks in. While he and Sophie are talking, the phone rings again. Sophie answers. It's Charlie, saying he desperately needs to talk to Otto. Otto refuses, flies into a rage, and picks up Sophie's ink bottle and throws it against the wall. Sophie runs to him and puts her arms around him, and we leave them standing there watching the ink run down the wall. Fox often said in interviews that she didn't overthink or psychologize when she was writing, that she followed her instincts. I don't inquire too closely about the reasons, she said. I don't inquire why I do certain things. But here, she said, she had vaguely in mind the biblical story from which comes the expression, the writing on the wall, a portent of coming misfortune. From the book of Daniel, Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, is giving a feast when a hand appears and writes on the wall, many, many tekel upharsin, numbered, weighed, divided. Daniel the prophet, when asked to interpret this, tells the king what it means. The days of your reign are numbered. You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Your kingdom will soon be divided. Fox said this came to her only after she'd finished working on the book, but it must have been in the back of her mind while she was working. A big question at the end of the book: what happens now to the Bentwoods' marriage? To me, seeing them like that, facing the wall together, it's as if they've decided they have to stay united, face whatever misfortune is coming together. They need each other, whatever their difference is. It's them against the world. Fox's attitude towards her characters is complicated and has sometimes been seen as hard and cold. But for me, it's all about giving them their freedom. She doesn't manipulate her characters. She doesn't use them as mouthpieces. And she never sentimentalizes them. She lets them be who they are. And most important, she refuses to orchestrate their redemption. I agree with an observation made by another writer, Jonathan Lethem, about Sophie's muddled thinking and denial about race. He points out, for example, the scene in the hospital where the ER is, in his words, a sea of racial hostility, and how unresolved that issue remains. But I think some take Fox as being harsher than she really was. The Bentwoods aren't blameless, but Fox doesn't invite you to despise them. I think what she really wants is for us to see some, maybe even a lot, of ourselves in them. The Bentwoods think they should be happy. Comparing themselves to the unlucky people they see all around them, they know they are extremely lucky. They want to enjoy their privileges, their good food, their gracious homes, their appreciation of the finer things in life. But Fox won't let them. In fact, they won't let themselves. They may be self-centered, but they are not oblivious. They know that something is very wrong with the way the world is ordered, that the system is rigged, that privilege causes harm to others, and they are troubled by this, but they have no idea what to do about it. As Otto cries out, I wish someone could tell me how I should live. But though she's looking in from the outside, Fox doesn't suggest that she is so very different from the Bentwoods, and certainly not that she is superior to them. She once said, I believe we're always struggling to maintain what we have or attain what others have. We're all under siege in one way or another. And she said also, I'm very respectful of the ignorance of human beings. I respect our ignorance more than our intelligence. She believed that people are always betraying one another in some way or other, and always disappointing one another, and that this comes largely from our having expectations that can't be easily met. She certainly suffered terrible betrayals in her own life, beginning at birth when her parents abandoned her to a foundling home, and who, in years to come, though they spent some time with her, refused to take care of her as any decent parent would. Indeed, her mother's hatred of her was so fierce that as a girl, Fox truly believed that if she could have gotten away with it, her mother would have killed her. And later, making her way as a writer, Fox suffered more than her share of disappointment and rejection. Whether she was writing fiction about chaos or looking back at her own highly disordered early life, for Fox it was the same. You have to be attached and detached at the same time, she said. Who knows to what extent we can be detached, but enough so that you can see what it is you're up to. I had an image once, a lynch mob, a victim, and a mediator, and I was all three. I didn't exclude myself from any group. In some way, that sense of being absolutely susceptible to all of it, to human flaws, to virtues, to circumstances, to experiences, has helped me a lot. And to end with another essential part of Fox's credo, I think what I feel mostly is obliged to tell not the truth, because we don't know what that is, but the truths we know. You know, I realized one day I was looking at a manuscript. I was lying on my bed, looking at it on the floor, turning the pages, and I suddenly thought, I have to mean every word I write, and the included.
Thanks so much, Sigrid. That was lovely to listen to. My first question is, for the most part, Fox's prose mirrors the restraint and coherence of her characters. But then there are these strange moments, as you call them in your essay, when things are less clear. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit more about those and how you think they operate within the story.
Well, I think that the book is full of these very strange moments. For one thing, it's in the dialogue a lot. You know, I mean, this is a realist novel, but it's not a work of naturalism. The characters talk to each other in a way that you say people don't talk like that. For example, what I read about Charlie saying, "You people with your introspection, etc." I mean, you imagine these two people are in a bar somewhere together in the middle of the night. It just doesn't sound like natural speech. So there's that. There's a strangeness throughout in the dialogue. But then, speaking of Charlie, that moment, for example, I mean, it comes in early in the book, him appearing at the door of Otto's and Sophie's house seems very odd to me, as does her decision to go walking with him. All that, it's very cinematic. And as you know, this book was made into a film in, I think, 1971, starring Shirley MacLaine. And then there's one sex scene, which is it's realistic, but it's strange. She responds to it afterwards as she says, "He jumped me," but she doesn't seem to be. She's not upset about it. She's just acknowledging it. And he, when it's over, says, I got her that time," or something like that. They've been married for 15 years. It just seems very strange to me. And there's a point when she's at the party in the beginning, when she's talking to the host, Mike, and she says, "I wish I were Jewish." There's no explanation for that, and it never comes up again, really. And at that same party, there's a young woman, and she says, "That's a beautiful anklet." And the young woman says, "It hurts every time I move." You know, and then there's never any commentary over these strange things. So, and also there's that scene where she's looking out the window and she sees this man at the window cupping his genitals. I mean, it's just there's so much of it. It's it's like there's the there's kind of that sense of if you ordinary life can seem terribly strange if you look closely enough at it. And I think she captures the strangeness of ordinary existence, and also she captures ordinary estrangement that people have from one another.
What about this idea of sight and looking? There's a lot of talk about eyeballs and what or whom the characters see or choose not to see, and whether seeing suffering makes you more obligated to do something about it.
Well, I think really the idea is that if you, it's not that it makes you more obligated in a moral sense, but seeing it makes it harder to ignore, harder to pretend that it isn't there. And denial is such an important part of this book. That's their defense. That's, denial is a very good defense mechanism. And throughout this book, both about the marriage and about everything that's going on, they are in denial about all kinds of things. And so they do see these things, and it does affect them. But basically they ignore it. Basically, they don't deal with it. So, but of course, if they were elsewhere and we're not seeing it at all, the suggestion is that they probably wouldn't give it very much thought. So I think it really is about them being plunked in the middle of it. Paula Fox, her work in general is very autobiographical. And when she was writing this, since the book was published in 1970, she's writing about the time and place that she was in. The years before, the 60s, the late 60s, and that part of Brooklyn, which is where she was living. Now, she and her husband had moved there from Central Park West in Manhattan. And that would have been a dramatic change. So I think she was just there, and she was thinking about this couple she wanted to write about, and she just used what she saw.
Mm-hmm. There's also this question, perhaps best embodied by Charlie Russell, of how you see suffering and perhaps respond to it, but avoid making it about your own guilt and virtue, that I thought felt very relevant today. It seems like we're having that exact conversation, especially with regard to social media activism.
Well, it's kind of mysterious with Charlie because, as I say, he's obviously not somebody that we're supposed to have a lot of respect for. I mean, first of all, he's very noisy and he's very nasty. You don't get a feeling about him at all that he would be an effective activist. If you wanted to get something done, this is not the person you would go to. But you can't say that his heart, or part of his heart at least, is in the right place. I mean, he's just struck. It struck him for the first time in his life that there would be another way to be in the legal profession, a better way. And since the book ends when it does, really, if you think of the afterlife of a story, it's not impossible to me that Charlie Russell would end up being a good activist. I mean, he's a lawyer, so that's helpful. And that he would actually have been woke in the very positive sense of that word. And then gone on to do that. It's not like there's no possibility of that. It's just that he's the one character that I feel there is disdain for from Fox, and certainly from the other characters in the book. It's that histrionic way, and his kind of lashing out at other people for I think the way he accuses other people, I think is his own guilt. He's accusing himself, but I think of him as being at a certain stage that he could get out of. But he's in a very ugly stage of it right now, where he seems to be more concerned with virtue signaling, with saying, I am not like you, though I have been living exactly the same kind of life you have and dealing with the same clients. He's at that stage, but it doesn't really mean that he would always have to be there. I just think if she were writing a book in which she wanted to, have something positive to say about that kind of character, it would not be Charlie. I mean, he seems to embody everything that is wrong with a certain kind of liberal or progressive type that she's going after there.
That's interesting about Paula Fox moving to Brooklyn. I spent a lot of time reading this story thinking about the couple's house in Brooklyn and how it feels symbolic or like more than a house. Would you agree with that? And would you consider this a gentrification novel?
Well, for me, the house is just a house in a sense. I mean, it's a nice house, but I don't know that I certainly I don't think would have called it a gentrification novel. I mean, or thought of it that way. The thing is that, as I say, she found herself in real life in the middle of this gentrifying neighborhood, and she wanted to write a novel set in that time, in that place. And she reported what she saw, and what she saw was gentrification. And she is such a good observer that we get a really strong view of it. And I don't think it really amounts to much more than that, her presenting, because that's her way, actually. She reports things. She tells it like it is, right? She does. And it's very important to her to be honest about it. But she doesn't take sides. And although she's showing this for exactly what's wrong with it, I don't feel that she has an agenda. I don't feel that she's that she wants to demonize anybody. If anything, I mean, there's this system. I mean, she understands very clearly that this is not just a question of individuals. It's systemic, and she's seeing there, just as she said. Privilege causes harm to others. That's inescapable. But I have to say, she presents, as Chekhov said, it's not the writer's job to solve the problems, but to state them precisely.
That makes sense. I guess I was thinking more that to them, the house is this place of protection, but even within it, or sort of behind past the front door or under the surface, they still somehow feel under threat. And I think for me, it was hard to parse their fear of violence, because we know that New York City in the late 60s could be a dangerous place. But in addition to being prejudiced and elitist, they also seem totally paranoid and hysterical to me. So what do you make of that tension or of their alarm?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, for one thing, and this struck me, right at the beginning of the book, they have this very nice house, but it's like right from the back door. I mean, that they can see the windows of other people who are really badly off. And, if they see somebody, urinating out a window, this is like a stone's throw from where they're living. So I guess, yes, it's as if the house were a place under siege in a certain way. But of course, the displaced people are the ones who could really say we're the ones who are under siege. Mm-hmm. But it is true that, like it's supposed to be, a kind of fortress, a protected place, the home. And you're right. From where they are, they can hear that dog being mistreated. They can see a lot of very sordid, unpleasant things. And the cat also gets in the way that she's just trying to feed it, but it manages to do its harm. But I completely agree with you that there is something hysterical about what's happening to them. Desperate people.
Right.
They really are kind of lost, and there is a paranoia. They behave in ways that are hysterical, as the end, her lashing out at this woman for no reason, and him throwing that bottle. I mean, this is really extreme behavior So I think it's a question. She's created these characters who are unraveling, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember hearing that mental health is the ability to deal with frustration, and I've always thought that was brilliant. And this is it. They're frustrated. They're freaked out. And why is Otto so why is he so angry? Why is he so freaked out about Charlie's decision, for example? Everything is like a threat. And when she gets bitten by the cat, it feels like a violation. And then they go to their house and it's been vandalized. It's very seriously vandalized. I mean, I can imagine how that would make you feel very violated and vulnerable. But other things, I agree. They overreact out of this fear that they don't know what's going to happen next, and they fear the worst in some way. But I think part of that is also guilt. Is guilt about the displacement, the gentrification, the income inequality, which they touch on throughout the book in their conversations. They're not unaware of it. They just don't know what to do about it.
Right. Yeah, they seem to have a lot of anxiety about their own role in things. And I think at one point Otto talks about Sophie's inability to draw lines and essentially assess a situation and know how serious it is or how much to care.
Exactly.
Even though the couple and Otto especially have a very us versus them mentality when it comes to people with less money or different backgrounds or sensibilities, there are a number of instances where you think they might be about to speak ill of an individual or a group and instead criticize America or American culture as a whole. What do you think Fox is saying about the state of the country at the time the book is set?
Well, it's true that Otto in particular, certain things are blurted out, like, don't you know this country is going to hell? And there's one point where Sophie sees a poster for elect George Wallace, and she has a reaction to that as a terrible thing, that people would be behind such a person. But I don't think it goes that far, because it seems very local to me. And there isn't a lot of discussion about, well, there isn't really any discussion about politics in it, in that sense. I mean, there's mention of the war in Vietnam, but there's no kind of extensive discussion or exploration or argument about national politics. The gentrification issue is really central. But I think, again, it's just that sense of, on an intimate scale, there's the marriage that's been corrupted, that isn't what it should be, that is troubled, that may be coming to an explosion of some kind, though I don't think that is what's going to happen. And then in the wider world, among their friends, people seem troubled. Everybody seems to be a little off in some way. And then in the neighborhood, which we've talked about, there's violence, there's chaos, there's filth, etc. And so it's kind of then, extended, like the country is going to hell. But she doesn't really do a lot with that. She doesn't tell you a lot about that.
Right. And it also seems that maybe the characters interpret politics through the lens of their own helplessness. I mean, there's that comment when Claire suggests she and Sophie have tea at the plaza and talk about the war and movies. And they're on the same level, which I guess is what happens in normal conversation.
Yes.
At the party the couple goes to early on, there's a woman who attributes all of society's ills to boredom, and she seems to be someone we're meant to regard as ridiculous. But boredom and banality come up again and again. So do you think she has a point, or does Fox?
Well, I think boredom is really important. fairly early on, Sophie, I mean, she's lost interest in the work that she does. And then what does she do? She's a woman of her generation. A woman's place is in the home, as it were. She's just, she even says, "Oh, I've got to do something because being idle is going to bring on depression." So she is depressed and she is bored. And if she were less bored, she wouldn't be so depressed. It's suggestive. Now, although Fox doesn't really, hammer away at this at all, there is this question about the children. She talks about Fox mentions that Sophie, they wanted to have children, the Bentwoods, and they tried, and they weren't able to. So, if she had a family, obviously she would not be so idle. Otto isn't idle. Otto isn't bored. It's really her, and it really is because she's a woman, and doesn't have a profession. She doesn't have children, though she wanted them. And after, I think it's after the house is vandalized, or right around there, Otto says maybe we should start talking again about adopting. And I think this is the first we hear of it. So, I found that quite moving because it's as if everything is wrong. Maybe what we need is children, and maybe let's talk about that. Maybe if we have children, things would be better for the marriage, and you wouldn't be so unhappy and so on. But you look at it, you don't see how she could possibly not be bored. And then that she's, also, although the term is never used, it's very clear to me from the book that we're also in the land of the midlife crisis. They're 40, right? And also, that's another thing. Paula Fox, she's writing about the years and the setting of exactly what was her life at the time, and also that was her age. It's the same age. So she did have children. So I think that boredom is a really important part of this, and that she that she might also be saying something about for certain privileged people, that's a risk.
And since you mentioned estrangement, I wanted to go back to that. And clearly Fox considers estrangement to be the norm, but are there any moments in the book that stand out to you as instances of genuine connection?
Well, yeah, I think that's why the book ends the way it does with the two. I mean, he does this. I try to picture yourself in her situation. They've been fighting and fighting. She has enough issues with this man. Then he throws the ink against the wall, and her response is to put her arms around him. It really suggests that she knows what he's going through. And, at that moment, he has come, she said, "I don't want you to go to work. I would like you to be here." Remember, they're waiting to hear about the cat and whether it's Rabbit or not. He says, "No, I have to go to work." But then he comes home early. She's not expecting him. And that's, I think, why when Charlie calls, it's just the last straw for him, because he's just trying to be with his wife at this moment, in a moment of connection. And then, the way they're facing that together, whatever, as I say, as I read it, it's like we've got to stay together. We're really the most important people we have. And I think throughout the book, the reason why the spats they keep having end is because one or the other then does console or comfort the other one. That's why I say their marriage is not entirely unsatisfactory. It's under strain. The most problematic thing is that she had this affair, which has really, the mistake there for her was that it really did bring something toxic into that marriage, even though her husband doesn't know about it.
That seems like a good lead into our first reader question from Ted Bonner of New Hampshire, who wrote, "What motivated the affair between Frances and Sophie? Desperation or love?"
I don't think it began as desperation. I think it was quite ordinary, in the sense of how people fall into these things. I mean, she didn't plan it. He didn't plan it. He was estranged from his wife. In that chapter, she says, "I was 35," or Fox says, "Sophie was 35, too old for romance." I think that it was a kind of classic situation. Something, the marriage has lost something. It's not exciting. It's not fulfilling. And this man comes along. He's attractive to her. So I don't think it began as love, but it also didn't begin as desperation. I think it began as an attraction, as a romance, as a fantasy, the way these things do begin. And then I think it became some kind of love on her part, but then it became a kind of desperate situation because, there's this wife in the picture, even though he's left her, but eventually he's going to go back to her. There's the problem with the heartbreak of the gift of the radio so it's just, to me, it seems like a very ordinary situation that she got herself into, and had kind of predictable bad consequences. But I don't think it was, I certainly don't think she was wildly in love or wildly desperate. I think that's part of the problem with it. Again, it was a boredom thing. Boredom. I think she became involved with Frances because she was bored, and because she was young, though 35 might be. In her case, she was having something of a midlife crisis.
And we have one more reader question from Susan Littman of California, who wrote, "Isn't desperate a relative term? How does one determine the legitimacy of a desperate character?"
Well, it is a relative term, and but I'm not sure what we mean by legitimacy. It is true that Henry David Thoreau said most people lead lives of quiet desperation and are resigned to those lives. In this particular case with Fox, there is a place in the book where, again, Otto and Sophie are having some kind of argument, and she says, "But life is desperate," she says. And I think that that means life is hard, really, to me. Life is hard. And I think that to some extent, Fox is saying, we're all under siege, as she said, which is another way of saying desperate. So we're all desperate to one degree or another, and to different degrees in our lives. And there's no legitimate or illegitimate. It's not like saying some people are worse off than other people, of course. But that's not really what she's after. She's really talking about that it's just, in her view, and certainly she uses this book to explore this, is just part of the human condition. And she uses this word desperate, which is maybe not the best word, but what else can we say? Which is why I say that life is hard, that there are just so many obstacles to happiness. And I think her idea that, that people are desperate for love, they're desperate to be seen. And that's not as easy, that's not as easy as I guess people think it should be. And so, life is full of betrayals and disappointments and rejections. And as she says, because people have these expectations that are not so easily met. And it's just kind of in human nature to have this feeling of desperation at times. But as you said, isn't there something a little hysterical about that? And I think it's partly because of that word. When you look at most men lead lives of quiet desperation, so I think that the word might be, this is a problem with language. It's always sort of off in some way. The word is a little bit too strong for I think what we're really talking about. But I think it's all legitimate.
Well, I think that might be a nice note to end on. So thank you so much. It was really great speaking with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us tonight for Tea Book Club, and thank you especially to Sigrid for speaking so brilliantly on this essential novel. You can find her essay on desperate characters at tmagazine.com. And if you'd like to continue the conversation, follow us on Twitter at @tmagazine and use the hashtag #TeaBookClub. The next book in this series is Ragtime by E.L. Doctorow, and we hope you'll RSVP to the event, which will take place on September 15th on our site. Finally, we'd like to give a special thank you to all of our subscribers. You make our work possible, and we look forward to seeing you next time.